My daughter moved her husband into my house 6 months after her mother died, changed the alarm code without telling me, and handed me a one-way bus ticket to Tucson. Dad, you're 67. It's time to let the younger generation take over. I had nothing in my pockets except a cracked phone and an old key my wife had pressed into my palm the night before she passed. I thought it was just a spare for the garden shed. I was wrong. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight, and whether you think what my daughter did was betrayal, or just the way the world works now. Hit subscribe, because this story is about to go somewhere none of us expected. The smell of sawdust and motor oil used to greet me every morning in the garage workshop behind our house on Birchwood Lane in Nashville, Tennessee. For 38 years, that workshop was my sanctuary. I restored old furniture chairs with broken legs, wardrobes with warped doors, dining tables scarred by decades of family dinners. My wife Carol used to joke that I could bring anything back from the dead if you gave me enough sandpaper and time. She wasn't entirely wrong. I turned 67 last March. My name is Walter Briggs. For 4 decades, I drove a school bus for the Davidson County District, fixed everything in our house with my own 2 hands, and raised one daughter, my daughter Lauren, on a teacher's salary and a repairman's stubbornness. When Carol was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 3 years ago, I became her caretaker, her driver, her cook, her companion through every treatment and every quiet night. When she passed 18 months later, Lauren flew in from Phoenix for the funeral, stayed 9 days, and then told me she and her husband Derek were going to move back to Nashville to be close to me. I was grateful. I won't pretend otherwise. The house felt like a museum after Carol was gone, every room. A exhibit of the life we'd shared. Having Lauren nearby seemed like the one good thing that could come from losing her mother. So when she asked if she and Derek could stay in the guest wing while they looked for a place, I said yes without hesitating. That was 14 months before the morning she handed me the bus ticket. I didn't see it happening at first. The way you don't notice a slow leak until the ceiling caves in. Derek stopped knocking before entering rooms. Lauren began referring to the house as our place in conversations with friends. They repainted the living room without asking. Derek installed a new security system for safety, Lauren said, and gave me a code that stopped working after the first week. When I mentioned it, Lauren said the system had glitched and she'd get me the new one. She never did. Meanwhile, Derek wasn't working. He'd left a sales job in Phoenix, under circumstances Lauren described as a corporate restructuring, and spent most of his days on the back porch taking calls I was never supposed to hear. Once, passing the hallway, I caught fragments. Something about a property deed. Something about an appraiser. I didn't press it. I trusted my daughter. That was my first mistake. The morning it ended started like any other. I came downstairs at 6:30 to make coffee, and found Lauren and Derek already at the kitchen table. Lauren had a manila envelope in front of her. Derek was wearing a suit, which he almost never did. Something cold moved through my chest before either of them spoke. "Dad, sit down. We need to talk about something important." I sat. Carol's chair was directly across from me, the one we'd bought at an estate sale in Franklin back in 1998. I always felt her presence in that chair. That morning I needed it. Lauren said they had been doing a lot of thinking about the future. She said the house was too large for me to maintain alone. She said a property like this required active management, and that Derek had connections in real estate development that could help maximize the asset. She said there was a wonderful senior living community in Tucson, climate-controlled, pool, social activities, and that she'd already spoken to the admissions director. I waited until she was done. "I built this house," I said. "Your mother and I broke ground on this lot in 1987. I framed every wall. I ran the electrical in the guest wing myself." Lauren's expression didn't change. "Dad, that's exactly why it's time to let someone else carry that burden." Derek slid the manila envelope across the table. Inside were brochures for the Tucson community and a one-way Greyhound ticket departing in 4 days. I looked at my daughter for a long time. She didn't look away, but something in her eyes wasn't quite right. Too steady. Too rehearsed. This was not a conversation she was having for the first time. She had practiced it. I stood up. took the envelope, and told them I needed to think. I went to the workshop and sat on the stool Carol used to perch on while I worked the green stool with the wobbly leg I'd fixed 6 times and could never bring myself to replace. I sat there for 2 hours. Then I remembered the key. The night before Carol died, she'd been unusually alert after days of near sleep. She took my hand, pressed a small brass key into my palm, and said 3 sentences. She said she had handled some things I didn't know about. She said I should use the key only if I ever truly needed it. She said I would know when. I had put the key in my wallet behind an old library card and half forgotten it. I took it out now and held it in the workshop light. Small, brass, with a number stamped on the bow. 1,147. It looked like a safe deposit box key. Carol had managed our household finances with the same quiet competence she brought to everything. She clipped coupons, tracked every utility bill, kept a ledger in her handwriting, going back to 1,985. I had trusted her completely and paid little attention to the details. I was a man who built things with his hands and left the paperwork to the person who was better at it. Carol never complained. She seemed to enjoy it. Actually, the research, the planning, the small private satisfaction of a ledger that balanced. What I didn't know was that managing the finances had come to mean something larger than I ever imagined. The next morning I drove to First Heritage Bank on Church Street, where we had kept our joint checking account for 30 years. I asked to speak to someone about a safe deposit box, gave them Carol's name and my ID, and presented the key. The woman at the desk, a manager named Patricia Holloway, went very still when she looked at her screen. She glanced at me over her reading glasses. "Mr. Briggs," she said carefully, "has anyone from the bank contacted you recently?" "No," I said. "Why?" She asked me to follow her to a private office. Patricia sat down across from me and turned her monitor slightly so I could see the screen. "Mr. Briggs," she said, "this box is flagged as part of a legacy trust account. It's been in a restricted status since your wife's passing. Pending contact from the account beneficiary. That's you." She paused. "I've been with this bank for 19 years. I want to be transparent with you. What's attached to this box is not something I encounter often." She showed me the screen. The numbers didn't register at first. My brain kept trying to correct them, the way it corrects an optical illusion back to something familiar. Investment portfolios, brokerage accounts, a property trust holding 3 parcels of real estate in Middle Tennessee. The total figure had more digits than our combined paychecks over 38 years of marriage. I asked Patricia if there was some kind of error. She shook her head gently and placed a sealed envelope on the desk between us. "This was in the box," she said. "It's addressed to you. Carol's handwriting on the front. Walter, open when you need an anchor." My hands didn't shake the way I expected. They went very still, the way they do when I'm about to make a cut. I need to get exactly right. I broke the seal. "My love," she began, "if you're reading this, something has pushed you to the edge of a place you don't recognize. I know you. You would not have looked for this key unless you truly had nowhere else to turn. So let me tell you what I've been doing all these years while you thought I was just clipping coupons." She wrote that it had started in 1994. With $500 she'd saved from her substitute teaching work. She had read about index funds in a magazine at the doctor's office and spent 3 months at the public library learning everything she could before investing a single dollar. She wrote that she had never told me because she knew I would have worried, would have said it was too risky, would have spent energy on it that I needed for work and for the life we were building together. She said that by the time she knew it had grown into something significant, it had become her private gift, her way of making sure that whatever happened, I would never be helpless. She wrote that she had watched Lauren change after she married Derek. She wrote that she had seen Derek's eyes move through their home the way an appraiser's eyes move, calculating rather than appreciating. She wrote that she had hoped she was wrong. She wrote that she had planned for the possibility that she wasn't. The last paragraph. "Walter, this is not charity, and it is not pity. This is 30 years of love expressed in the one language I was better at than you. Use it to stand up straight. Use it to protect what we built. And please don't let anyone take Birchwood Lane from you without a fight worth having. Forever yours, Carol. I folded the letter, pressed it against my chest, and sat in Patricia's office for a long time without speaking. Then I told her I was going to need a referral to a very good attorney. She said she knew exactly who to call. Raymond Chu had practiced property and estate law in Nashville for 31 years. His office on 2nd Avenue had the organized, unhurried quality of a man who had seen enough emergencies to stop treating them like emergencies. He listened to everything without interrupting, reviewed the documents Patricia had prepared, and then asked me 3 questions. Was the house title solely in my name? Yes, I said. Had I signed anything in the past 14 months, anything at all involving the property? My stomach dropped. Derek had brought home a document 3 months earlier. Something about a home equity line of credit for renovation purposes. He'd said it was a formality, just establishing access in case of emergency repairs. I had signed it at the kitchen table while Lauren poured coffee and Derek talked about plans for the back deck. Raymond's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes went very alert. He asked me to get him a copy of everything I'd signed. 2 days later, Raymond called me at the motel I'd checked into on Murfreesboro Road. I had not gone back to Birchwood Lane after the bank meeting. His voice was measured but direct. "Walter," he said, "Derek has used that equity line to borrow against the house. The amount is significant. More importantly, there's a quitclaim deed filed with the county register's office 6 weeks ago that carries your signature." I told him I had never signed a quitclaim deed. Raymond said he knew. He said the signature didn't match my others on file. He said we needed to talk about next steps, and that I should not contact Lauren or Derek until we did. I sat on the edge of the motel bed with Raymond's voice in my ear and thought about the coffee Lauren had poured, while Derek pointed to the document and said, "Sign here, Dad. It's just a formality." I thought about the renovation plans Derek had spread on the table, glossy renderings of a house that no longer had me in it. Raymond connected me with a forensic document specialist and a private investigator named Stan Gear, a former Metro Nashville detective who worked fraud cases. Stan was a compact, unhurried man in his late 50s who drank his coffee black and took notes in a small spiral notebook like it was still 1987. "Give me 2 weeks, Stan said. What he found in 10 days was enough to fill a file folder 3 inches thick. Derek had no corporate restructuring story. He had been terminated from his Phoenix sales job for misappropriating client funds. A settlement had been reached quietly, no criminal charges, but the paper trail was clear. Since arriving in Nashville, he had incorporated a shell company called Birchwood Holdings, LLC. He had approached 2 separate real estate developers with preliminary discussions about the property on Birchwood Lane. Positioning himself as a principal seller, he had borrowed against the forged equity line and funneled the money into accounts connected to Birchwood Holdings. Current debt attached to my property, $240,000. There was more. Stan had obtained public records showing Derek had done this before in Scottsdale, Arizona, 5 years earlier, with his previous wife's elderly father. That situation had been settled civilly when the father died before pressing charges. Derek had walked away. He had found Lauren, moved toward her with the patience of someone running a very specific playbook, and waited for her mother to die. I drove back to Raymond's office and sat across from him with Stan's folder between us and the cold, clean weight of understanding about what had happened to my family. Raymond said we had 2 options. We could file a civil suit and pursue the matter through property court, which would be slow and public and emotionally costly. Or we could approach this the way Carol had approached everything, quietly, precisely, and from a position of complete control before the other side knew we had moved. I said I preferred the second option. What Raymond constructed over the following 3 weeks was elegant in the way that a perfectly fitted dovetail joint is elegant. You only see the beauty of it once you understand how much pressure it's meant to hold. First, the forged deed was flagged with the county register and a fraud hold placed on the property title, which froze Derek's ability to sell or transfer. Second, Raymond negotiated with the lender on the fraudulent equity line, presenting the forgery evidence, which triggered an immediate investigation and suspension of the debt pending resolution. Third, and this was Carol's money at work. Raymond established a properly structured trust in my name that absorbed the legitimate mortgage on Birchwood Lane, leaving me as the unencumbered primary title holder once the fraud instruments were cleared. Derek didn't know any of this was happening. He was still on my back porch taking his quiet calls. The morning I came back to Birchwood Lane, I didn't announce myself. I used my key, the original one, the one I'd cut in 1987 when the house was first built, and came in through the workshop entrance. Lauren was in the kitchen. Derek was in the living room on his laptop. Neither of them heard me come in. I walked into the living room and sat down in the armchair across from Derek. He looked up and went completely still. I said, "Good morning. I'd like to show you something." I opened Raymond's folder on the coffee table and laid the documents out one by one. The forensic comparison of the signatures, the incorporation records for Birchwood Holdings, the communications with the developers, the Scottsdale case file Stan had obtained. Lauren had come to the doorway by the third document. Her face went through several expressions I'd spent 67 years learning to read. Confusion first, then the beginning of defense, then something that collapsed those two things into each other when she looked at Derek and he didn't deny anything. "Derek," she said. Her voice was very quiet. He said her name back the same way, like they were both suddenly very far away from where they'd expected to be. I told Derek he had 48 hours to retain an attorney. I told him the fraud case was already in the hands of the district attorney's office. Raymond had seen to that the previous afternoon. I told him that every debt he had attached to this property was going to follow him individually, not through me, because the instruments were fraudulent and void. Then I looked at my daughter. "Lauren," I said, "I am not going to lose this house, and I am not going to lose you. But I need you to understand what has been done here, and I need you to make a choice about which side of it you're on." She sat down on the couch. Derek stood and left the room. We listened to his footsteps on the stairs, the sound of a closet opening, the quiet movements of a man calculating his next position. Lauren looked at her hands for a long time. Then she looked at me. "Dad, did you know any of this? About what Derek was doing?" "No," I said. "Did you?" The pause that followed was the most important 30 seconds of the last 14 months. "No," she said. And then, "I don't think I wanted to know." That is the truest thing she has said to me in a very long time. Derek hired an attorney, but it did him limited good. The forgery finding was definitive. The district attorney pursued fraud and forgery charges. The civil recovery action ran parallel. By the time the criminal case concluded 8 months later, Derek had pleaded guilty to a single count of felony forgery and agreed to a restitution order covering the fraudulent equity line and legal fees. He received 3 years supervised probation and was ordered to have no contact with me or the property. He and Lauren had separated within 2 weeks of that morning in the living room. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. I won't pretend any of that was clean or easy. Lauren went through a period I don't have precise language for, a kind of furious grief directed mostly at herself, for the choices she'd made and the things she hadn't let herself see. We had hard conversations. More than once she raised her voice and I raised mine. But we kept having them. That's the thing about a house you built yourself. You know where the load-bearing walls are. By the following spring, Lauren had found an apartment in East Nashville and a job she was genuinely good at, teaching middle school music the way Carol had once taught her. She came to Birchwood Lane for Sunday dinners. She helped me repaint the living room back to the color Carol had chosen in 2003. We didn't talk about Derek much. When we did, it was briefly and honestly, and then we moved on. The Whitman Learning Center in the video I studied had a parallel in my own life. I had thought about what Carol's money was ultimately meant to do. It wasn't meant to sit in accounts. It wasn't meant to fund a legal battle and go quiet. Carol had spent 30 years growing it because she believed in building things that lasted, the same way I believed in wood and joints and the right tool for the right job. I converted the workshop behind the house into a community woodworking space. I put up a small sign, "Briggs Workshop, open Saturdays." I teach basic furniture restoration to anyone who wants to learn. Some are retirees. Some are younger men who never learned to use their hands. One Saturday a month, Lauren comes and handles the business side registration, materials, a small fee structure, with the same quiet competence that apparently runs in our family. On the workbench, next to my good chisels, I keep Carol's letter in a small frame I made myself. People ask about it sometimes. I tell them it's a reminder that the people who love you are often doing things you don't fully see, and that it is worth paying attention. It is also a reminder that a key is only as useful as the person who knows what it opens. I think about what Carol saw in Derek that I missed. I think about how she planned for the possibility without telling me, carrying that weight alone so I wouldn't have to carry it before I needed to. I think about the Saturday mornings she would sit on the green stool and watch me work, never idle, always reading something or making notes in her ledger, and how I thought I understood what she was doing. I understood approximately nothing. What I know now is this. Betrayal doesn't always arrive through the front door wearing a stranger's face. Sometimes it walks in beside someone you love, moves slowly, waits patiently, and counts on the fact that you trust too much to look carefully. That isn't weakness. That is what love costs when it meets the wrong person. But here is what I also know. Love that is real leaves behind more than grief. It leaves instructions. It leaves keys. It leaves letters in bank vaults that say, in plain handwriting you would recognize anywhere. I saw this coming, and I made sure you would be all right. I put in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and whether there's someone in your life who's been quietly building something you haven't fully seen yet. Some of the best things in our lives are happening in the background, in the ledger someone else is keeping, in the plan you won't find until you truly need it. Subscribe if this story found something in you that needed finding. Share it with someone who's been told it's time to step aside, because the people who built something with their own hands are never as finished as someone else wants them to be. Every night this week I've been falling asleep to the sound of the wood shop, the old building settling, the smell of oil and cedar, and thinking about my wife. Not with the sharp sadness of the first year. Something quieter, something that feels, most nights, almost like gratitude. She prepared. And because she prepared, I am still here.